You're listening to Left at the Valley 2.0.
All right, our next guest is Mr. Steve Grumbine, a proponent of modern monetary theory. He's a snappy dresser and a snazzy dancer. Steve, welcome for being. Thank you so much for being on Left in the Valley.
You got it, man.
Oh, my applause! I forget the applause. I always forget the
Every
applause.
time.
The large applause. There it is.
Woo,
We could just do it. Come on, Brent.
I'm holding my coffee.
Steve, thank you so much for joining us here at Left in the Valley. Really appreciate that. Maybe you'd be so kind to give us a quick bio as to who Steve Grumbine is.
Yeah, so I'm really nobody, but I'm the founder and CEO of Real Progressives and Real Progress in Action, a 501c3 and a 501c4 respectively. I'm also the host of the podcast Macro and Cheese, which is a podcast specifically focused on modern monetary theory and the political implications thereof. And I'm also the co-host of another podcast called The New Untouchables, The Pecora Files, which is all about the elite control fraud that has been done in Wall Street to basically steal our homes away from us and our pensions. So that's kind of my claim to fame at this moment.
So we could probably use you to fill up like probably 5 shows of just the knowledge you have in your mind. But today we will, with modern monetary theory.
You know, flattery will get you everywhere, dear.
Absolutely.
Why don't you say nice things to me, Kevin?
We're always in the presence of a big brain here, guys. So treat him as such with the respect he deserves. So,
I thought you meant my brain.
No.
No.
Your brain is nice too, but sorry, Steve beat you out here.
All right.
So, Steve, what is modern monetary theory?
Well, back in 1972, Richard Nixon took us off the Bretton Woods Accord, which was basically a global gold standard, and moved us to what they call a sovereign, free-floating fiat currency, non-redeemable for gold anymore, basically just pieces of paper. And all the laws and rules written around the dollar were written back then around the gold standard, and all the textbooks were written as if we were still on the gold standard. But something very fundamental changed in 1972. And so MMT seeks to explain and describe in great detail what that means and what happened in 72 and what a sovereign free-floating fiat currency actually can do. And so MMT is the study of monetary operations. It's the non-mythological, non-conspiracy driven version of economics. It kind of cuts right to the quick and basically tells us that as long as we have the ability to levy a tax, then we have the power to spend. As long as we are not at full employment and we have real resources, we have the power to spend. And it kind of debunks the whole concept of the national debt. National debt is not us borrowing our own dollars from other countries, which is kind of ludicrous on its face. But it's really the sum total of every untaxed dollar in the economy. So one of the key insights to modern monetary theory, or MMT, is the role of taxation and the fact that taxes are not collected to fund spending operations. It's not, taxes are never reused. So MMT shows us that a dollar is a tax credit, and it's the government's unit of account, like an inch or a pound. And so you can never run out of inches. You can never run out of pounds, unfortunately. And at the end of the day, it shows us that we've been lied to for an awful long time about what is quote unquote affordable and not affordable. And you look around and you start realizing all the things that we've been talking about as leftists, all the things that we want as progressives, have been available to us all along. We've just been literally lied to and convinced that it's our hard-earned tax dollars going to pay for somebody else's bad decisions. And so MMT disabuses us of all that nonsense and gets us to the point where we can see the economy for what it is. And that is ultimately real resources are what is scarce, not pieces of paper. So there's a lot more to it than that. But in a nutshell, MMT describes currency as it is today.
Okay, there's a lot to dig in there. Really
Yeah.
a lot. Just in like 5 sentences, and like my brain just like tilt.
Oh no, that was
Okay,
great.
That's the way it is for all of us, brother.
all right. So let's go back to the beginning. You were saying so Nixon took you guys off the
The
dollar
gold
being back
standard.
against
Woods
the
Accord.
gold standard.
Yep.
Right. But it seems that economists today are still being taught that the old rules that they had when the dollar was backed against the gold still applies.
That's
Right?
correct.
Okay.
That's
So
correct.
so maybe this is a layman question because I've always asked that of economists and they've never had a good answer. And we were talking about this during the break, Benjamin and I. I've always, from an idiot's perspective, they've always told me that the economy is there to grow. We need to grow stuff, grow. But it seems to me that we live in a world with finite resources. So there's something that doesn't work there, right? You can't grow perpetually forever. There has to be some kind of breaking point because we were talking. You need to improve on widgets, but you eventually run out of raw materials, right? Because we don't live in if we had like finite wood, that'd be great, or finite electricity, that'd be great, but that's not the case. So how do we get over that at some point? Because we know right now, as a population on the planet, we are running towards that wall where eventually we're going to run out of stuff. So is there any explanation from the MMT point of view as to that?
Well, MMT is pretty just plumbing, man. It's just straight plumbing. It just tells you how the dollars are created, tells you what you spend them, where you spend them, what it will do, how it will impact the economy. It doesn't really have a moral compass, although there is a lot of philosophical work being done currently to try and develop a theory of a political theory surrounding the economy, the political economy of MMT. But ultimately, you see this happening with Republicans and other right-wing, political parties around the world where they can spend to infinity on the military and so forth.
Yes.
But reality is that the real resources, the productive capacity available to us is really the kind of like that wall, right? That's when things start getting dicey. You oftentimes hear people talk about, we're going to print money, we're going to cause inflation and stuff like that. And this pandemic kind of showed us that when your supply chains aren't keeping up with demand, when your toilet paper needs are outpacing your pooping, and so forth, that right there is a real honest to God supply chain breakdown, and that can drive prices up and so forth. But the real resources are not just, oil and stuff like that, because we can always do green energy. We can flip around and we can use something else. Every time something runs short, we can always repurpose something else. There's a million ways of doing things. And what we're doing today is the most unsustainable way of producing a society. I mean, from using petroleum products in absolutely every single thing we produce, to, stripping forests and basically robbing the earth of its lungs. We see massive climate change. The impacts of that we just felt with this latest hurricane. And you can see as fires are breaking out across the Pacific Northwest and even the Arctic underneath of the frost, all that moss underneath that, there's zombie fires going crazy. I mean, climate's on fire. I mean, and that should be an indicator that maybe something's not right. So when you talk about, hey, everything's finite, yes, it is. And it's very important to be, to conserve the real resources. However, the pieces of paper, they're absolutely infinite. You can never run out of inches. You can never run out of pounds. You can never run out of Canadian dollars or US dollars unless you politically choose to do so. So if you think about this for a minute, healthcare. Right. Let's look at something very important to most of us, healthcare, especially in the middle of a pandemic. And if you don't have enough doctors, you don't have enough nurses, you don't have enough orderlies or gurneys or hospital beds or whatever. You're going to have some problems, right? Because now the real resources haven't kept up with the real demand. And so this is really what you're seeing, in society today. We're confusing that for hey, we printed money and now we have inflation and so forth. But it's really a factor of the real resources not being there for purchase, and people are competing for those real resources, and it drives the price up.
So when economists go on the radio on a talk show host or whatever, and they talk about inflation, are they essentially lying about what really is the cause?
Two things. Number one, they're either lying, which is my guess, or number two, they've been taught out of Greg Mankiw's textbook, which is the standard econ textbook in all the colleges, and it's just full of shit. It's just full of shit. So they've been either completely led down the neoclassical path, or B, they're literally lying. And there's quite a few out there that know the truth that are lying. But to quantify which way that goes, I couldn't answer that. But I'm seeing some progress. I am seeing some people breaking out and starting to realize, oh, wait a minute, hold on. This great book by Stephanie Kelton, The Deficit Myth, kind of explains all this stuff so easy that a child could understand it. It's short enough read. You could read it in the airport and in the bathroom. So, there's real good information out there. And I think that it's a bottom-up approach, because when you look at the way economics works, you have an orthodoxy, if you will. And that orthodoxy took over the colleges and universities over the years. And it wasn't some, nice handshake agreement where they took over. There's a lot of violence involved in bad economics. A lot of people die when you get economics wrong. A lot of people starve to death. There's a lot of really, really negative consequences from that. So you would like to believe that these economists and politicians and so forth take the time to realize that by saying really stupid things, they get really stupid prizes like dead people. So it's hard to give them a pass, but I believe that a lot of them genuinely just learned from the bad textbooks and never unlearned it. And now their pride won't allow them to learn the way it really works. And I think that's kind of what we're facing right now.
So inflation's like one of those big scary buzzwords that people like to throw around. They don't necessarily even really know what it means or believe it, but they're like, inflation bad. And everyone's like, you're right. So bad and scary.
From the layperson's point of view, Benjamin, you're absolutely right. I mean, I can't really describe inflation. I could not. Somebody tells me describe inflation. I'm not sure what I would say, but I'm supposed to know it's bad. So I think you absolutely have a point there.
But is inflation bad, or is it just excessive inflation that's bad?
So good question there. So most of what we call inflation is usually what we call a relative value story, where some price has gone up, milk has gone up, bread has gone up, toilet paper has gone up. That's not inflation. That's a relative value story, and it's usually something to do with supply and demand, usually a supply chain deal. However, real inflation is steady growing inflation. It's consistently growing up, right? Across all prices. The entire price level goes up. That is inflation, okay? However, what you oftentimes see, and this is kind of funny, is they jump the shark and they go from, hey, why are prices going up on my milk, to, oh my God, it's hyperinflation, we're all going to die. And hyperinflation is basically currency rejection, okay? So think about the three big ones that always jump out. Weimar Republic, oh my God, they're gonna print money and we're all gonna die. They came in with barrels of money and blah, blah, blah. And really what happened, let's be fair, if anybody even did the slightest bit of historical reading, they understand that Germany was slaughtered by the Weimar, by the Treaty of Versailles. The French particularly loved soaking them with debt in foreign denominated French francs.
Yes.
And, obviously Germany produced, Reichsmarks. So you had foreign debt, number one. Number two, the industrial sector went on strike as a means of protesting against the Treaty of Versailles. And so the productive capacity, there we go again with that whole supply chain thing, right? The productive capacity plummeted. They were decimated by a war. And so voila, you've got a massive amount of underproduction. I mean, you could have had $1 trillion, but if you only have one loaf of bread, it doesn't matter what. So now you've got the people with $1 trillion fighting back and forth for that loaf of bread. And so that's Germany, Weimar Republic in a nutshell. Then you travel down south to Africa, to Zimbabwe, and you always hear this one. Go ahead.
No.
We're agreeing with you.
Okay. So you hear, sorry about that. I was just giving you some room there. So you hear Zimbabwe, right? Well, what happened here? Let's talk about that. So once again, Mugabe gives the farmland to the warriors, the people that were his tribesmen, the countrymen, took it away from the colonizers. Sounds great in paper, right? Well, as the colonizers walked away from their farms, they set a lot of the crops on fire. Zimbabwe had food sovereignty, but after that, they didn't have food sovereignty anymore. And so 60% of their productive capacity for farms was decimated by both inability to know how to farm, because these guys were good warriors and they're good countrymen, but they were terrible farmers. And the other thing was that the colonizers said, screw you, I'm going to burn your crops down. So Zimbabwe had a major problem with food and a lack of food, a lack of ability to replicate that food. And so they were forced to go outside the country to bring food in. And once you lose food sovereignty, once you lose energy sovereignty, it's all downhill after that. And so Zimbabwe was a case, once again, where supply didn't keep up with demand, and they started taking on foreign debt. They couldn't print their way out of this to save their lives, and that's what they tried to do afterward. But the printing happened after the hyperinflation occurred. It didn't create the hyperinflation. So there's the next one. And then the third one is, we got the famous Venezuela, and we've got Argentina, but let's just look at Venezuela for now. Venezuela has one export product, and that's crude. Okay. And they're competing with the Saudis. They're competing with the Saudis, who absolutely love to manipulate the price of oil. And so what they did, because crude is easier to come by than refined oil, they went ahead and dropped the bottom out of the price for crude. And they basically took away Venezuela's ability to pay their foreign debt. And by dropping the price, now all of a sudden, the one thing they could pay that out with oil was gone. And so again, another hyperinflation story, but this time also includes a little bit of political corruption. Thank you, USA, and so forth. So ultimately, each of these things, none of them were a monetary phenomenon. All of them were either a supply chain issue, a production issue, or some sort of political corruption or foreign debt. None of them, not one of them, had to do with money. So you understand, most people don't say that, do they? You've never heard that story probably. And it's a shame, because it's so easy. It just rolled right off my tongue. And it'll roll right off your tongue once you put it together, because this is exactly the kind of information you need to be able to debunk and demystify a lot of the things that the standard activist, standard 3 a.m., YouTube show, all the different Ron Paul and libertarian logic crap that goes out there pretending to be woke is actually a joke. And, they're always telling you, oh, if they print more money, we're going to have hyperinflation. We're all going to die. And it's just the standard fear porn of an ignorant society that likes drama. There's so many freaking soap operas on. Why create drama about money? I just don't
I actually recently, just total side note, saw an advertisement for a new television show coming on, and it's a new drama about a reality dance show, a reality dance competition. So now they're making scripted shows about reality television.
Oh yes,
you got a lot.
I'm just like, my mind went. Anyway, that's the drama queen.
But going back on Venezuela, I think that was very interesting, because a very similar thing happened here in Canada when we had the boom, when the price of a barrel of oil went to $140, and the tar sands, and the tar sands here, they were developing the tar sands, and then OPEC dropped the price, and effectively shut down. Effectively shut down the tar sands. Right?
They don't like competition, do they?
No, they don't like too. They didn't like the idea,
because it's very expensive to the US. And it was expensive to get the crude out of the tar sands, though. So they dropped the price of the crude to the point where it was actually not profitable to be pulling the oil, and then all of a sudden, tens of thousands of jobs are just gone overnight.
Which, from an economic point of view, it's like, that sucks. But from an environmental point of view, I would say, cool. that's a good thing.
Right. Like OPEC essentially stopped fracking in the US. Like they shut it down.
Yep.
But let me ask you, not for the right reasons.
What is the one thing that is ubiquitous in just about every single thing that we do, from our computer monitors and the plastic in it to the tires on our cars to everything? Oil. It's all oil based, right?
Yeah.
So what is the one real resource that could truly bring about inflation, period. I mean, really bring about inflation.
Oil.
Petroleum products, exactly. Because if there's a shortage, it's not just a shortage for your cars. Yes, we would have pain and suffering. It's not just a shortage for your heating. It's not just a shortage for, other lubricants and stuff like that. But every windmill, all the green energy requires petroleum products too. I mean, it really could use probably hemp and other things like that. But we still have a need for oil-based kind of lubricants and plastics and other things like that, as long as we operate in the system that we're operating in today. And it's funny because I was joking around yesterday talking about the way furniture used to be. And if you look, every piece of furniture used to be solid wood. It used to have carvings in it. It was beautiful. Now everything is mass produced with this press board material, and a lot of that press board stuff, petroleum products in it as well. I mean, so each step along the way, we have literally pulled ourselves away from the kind of sustainable type building that we could do and pushed it to an oil-based thing. So we are literally one commodity away from real problems. Everything is contingent on oil right now. And that's no joke. That's not just the evil travel industry. That's also keeping us alive, warm, and everything else. So there's a lot going on here to unpack. It goes well beyond economics. And it's funny, you talked earlier about, this nonstop growth and how, at some point in time, we got to say, no. And interestingly enough, I'll be interviewing one of the premier voices in economics, Dr. Jason Hickel, who is of the degrowth world. I had spoken to a young guy a few months ago who had written a paper on degrowth, and it pointed me to Jason Hickel. And through a couple bad scheduling opportunities, we didn't hook up, and tomorrow I'm supposed to, fingers crossed, interview him. But the entire idea behind degrowth is that there are ways of living, there are ways of creating sustainable practices, and it's really about reshaping how we look at what constitutes good and bad. Currently, most countries are operating on what they call GDP, or gross domestic product.
Yes.
And all GDP is a very, very indiscriminate gauge of all economic activity. What if we had a genuine progress indicator, which my good friend Phil Lawn down in Australia champions? It talks about basically the health and prosperity of the nation, talks about looks at everything, right? You got guys like Steve Keen who talk very heavily about incorporating energy into your economic diagrams and economic modeling instead of just GDP. These things are very, very critical in getting to that kind of a degrowth angle, because if you're measuring growth differently instead of just the sum total of every transaction, you might have a more meaningful gauge to assess where you really are in society. And I think especially given, this most recent hurricane was devastating down in Louisiana, but it was devastating all the way up through Pennsylvania, New York, and New Jersey too. We have been experiencing very, very deleterious effects of climate change. And it's largely, I think it's indisputable that mankind has hastened up a normal transition that the world has probably gone through a million times, but we have literally put that thing on steroids, and we have no mitigation plan. We have no mitigation plan whatsoever. So I think your point about degrowth and understanding that, at some point we're going to hit the wall. It's going to require some different ways of thinking, different ways of measuring what constitutes good growth. Every time a hurricane comes through and wipes out some part of Texas, every single time we rebuild that's part of GDP. That's no joke. Every time a ship blows up in the ocean and an oil spill goes out there, every time we spend money on cleaning up that oil spill, that goes to GDP. You see what a funky number that is? That number doesn't really say a whole lot, does it? Every time some guy gets a job to deny you a health request, okay, that's GDP. There's still money being transacted there. Indiscriminate, crazy. It's an absolutely useless measure. So I think that, that is a starting point to bring in some sanity to how we go forward in a sustainable fashion.
It's going to be interesting to see because from a political angle here, the word degrowth, I think, is going to be problematic because people are going to see it as taking a step backwards.
Yeah.
So
I agree. It's like I talked to him. I was like, "Do you realize this is like the worst marketing ever?"
Yes.
And they said, "Well, it's only secondary to calling it MMT, modern monetary theory, right? Because now everybody goes, it's just a theory." People don't understand that either. But degrowth was intended to be a shocker kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's intended to jolt you into a conversation. I didn't like it at first. I still don't like it if that's the angle we're going to market it by, but it definitely brings about a significant conversation if you understand what's on the other side of degrowth. Now, all of a sudden, you're throwing the breadcrumbs out. You're getting people interested.
Mm-hmm.
Let me ask you, have you all ever found yourself really, truly interested in economics? It's one thing to be interested in making money, but it's another thing to be really, really interested in digging into economics. If you have, that's great. But most people won't say that. Most people go,
honestly, I'm a numbers person. I'm an accountant. So
so you're the rare bird.
Yeah. So it was part of college. And when I took, they start with macroeconomics and then they take you into microeconomics. It's all part of your first year classes. And I was fascinated. I was like, wait, maybe I should have been an economist instead of an accountant.
Yeah, I'm already falling asleep.
So I was fascinated by it. I still am. I think that there's ways to manipulate the numbers just to make yourself look good. So
absolutely. I got to tell you, one of the things that's very important about MMT is the very job that you do as an accountant. Mm-hmm. Because what MMT does that none of the others do is we really focus on the accounting identities as well, from sectoral balances and stock flow consistent modeling to other things like watching reserve balances and how money is created and watching the flows through those like T ledgers, you can watch all the stuff go. Yeah, there you go. And so what ends up happening?
Credits, it's accountant.
That's it. And so when you watch that, you realize that MMT not only distinctly shows you the plumbing at an accounting level, really, really focuses on the accounting identities. And this, I think the most important thing that you will ever learn about MMT, and I hope that this, if nothing else I've said sticks, currency issuers and currency users are two dynamics that must be understood, and you will understand the foundation of all macroeconomics once you get that. Mm-hmm. When you look, everybody's got it in their head that the federal government borrows money from its central bank.
But they don't.
They don't at all. So in our world, in the U.S., Congress, Article 1, Section 8 of our Constitution gives the power of the purse to Congress. Well, Congress then writes a bill, writes a law. And then what does the Federal Reserve do? The Federal Reserve, with its little fingers, goes in there and keystrokes deposits into the Treasury's accounts. Mm-hmm. Keystrokes. They're not borrowing that. They're keystroking that into existence. The government doesn't have fat stacks of Benjamins laying in the back office. Mm-hmm. The government creates them every time it writes a bill. Mm-hmm. And then when it taxes, now, this is the key here, right? The tax is what gives those pieces of paper their value, because the government agrees to accept $1 for $1 in tax liability, okay? And that dollar is the government's obligation. That's the debt. A dollar is debt to the government, okay? Because it's agreeing to accept that payment for tax. So the government is, by definition, not only the monopoly currency issuer, but it's also the price setter, okay? So when the government spends that dollar into existence, it typically spends it to Halliburton or Northrop Grumman or one of these military contractors, right? But regardless, that's the point of entry into the economy. The dollars that you see in the Federal Reserve and stuff, those aren't real dollars. Those are interbanking dollars. They're reserves. And they're created to offset that T account where the liability is the dollar, the asset is the reserve. And once the thing comes back in payment of tax, it zeroes out. Just like when a government creates banks, allows banks, gives charters to banks, those banks are by definition public purpose entities. Until you deregulate them and say, well, we're going to have a hands-off policy here and let them run amok. So now banks who have a government charter to operate to give loans payable in the government's unit of account. They don't get to create money in terms of like net financial assets. And this is for the accountant over there. The net financial assets are only produced by the federal government. The banks, they only can create loans, and loans create deposits. But when those loans are paid back, it zeroes out. It doesn't create a permanent entity in the economy. It's a temporary loan that zeroes out, and the only thing that the bank keeps is the interest that they've charged on that money.
The bank just borrows it from the government and then gives it.
They don't even borrow it. They don't even. That's the thing. They literally, they're given the opportunity to create loans in the government's unit of account. That's it.
Yeah.
So I've got so many.
Well, and I don't know if it's the same in Canada or as in the.
It's very much the same.
Same in the U.S. as it is in Canada, but there's like the prime rate that the banks are charged by the government to borrow.
That's all rules. That's all rules, right? That's all banking rules and stuff.
That's where I get the loaning from, because the banks are kind of borrowing at prime and then lending it to you at prime plus or prime under. Sometimes it's prime under. If you're real good, you can get a mortgage that's less prime, but very few subprime mortgages.
So let's see if I understood some of this straight. So when a bank creates a loan that's based on the government's currency, does it create a loan with the same essential value? If the government says basically we've created so much money, you can only loan out so much?
No, the banks are not constrained by the amount that they're able to lend. There is some stuff. There are some rules, and I'm not going to get into this because this exceeds my ability to really get into the weeds the way you'd like to have me get into the weeds. But basically, they have very, very little that prevents them from being able to make whatever loans they want to make. They do have some rules about assets, and they do have some rules about the amount of assets they have on their books to back these things, but they are not reserve constrained. They can lend the money first and then go out on the open market and get the reserves to fill their account after the fact. There's no, these things are coming out of thin air. That's
That's how money gets created.
I was always told that, for example, that like if you wanted to start a bank, you needed like at least like a certain amount in liquidity, and then you can loan out as a percentage of that. But
you can loan out more than you actually own.
Yes, they were saying that, but you needed still that liquidity to begin with, right? You need a certain base of money.
Just remember that banks don't lend deposits.
No.
Okay, the money that you save at that bank, it doesn't get lent out. Banks don't lend reserves either. Banks create deposits. Loans create deposits. Their finger created dollars for you to borrow. The monies and the liquidity and all the other things they have on the back end, that's something totally different, right? You have FDIC in the U.S. I don't know what you have in Canada that backs up your deposits.
Same thing, CDIC.
Okay. So, we have the government has a goal. I mean, the whole banking system's primary purpose is to, especially central banks, is to clear payments, is to facilitate transactions. And if you go back in the United States in particular, back to 1913 when they created the Federal Reserve, every bank had its own, some people putting their thumb on the scale. They had Billy Bucks, Joey Bucks, Quadruple Bucks, Josie Bucks, whatever. And they didn't match up, right? So it was almost like foreign exchange in your own country. And so the idea of standardizing that with Federal Reserve notes was a hard fought, battle between not only the government, but also the banksters, and finding a way to blend all these things together to bring some sanity to the mixture. And they did not understand all that they had just created back then. And you saw the collapse, the big stock market crash, and all the other stuff that came about as a result of fraud and a whole host of other things. I mean, we had banks with, when you go to the vault and you had stacks of money and coins and stuff like that. It isn't like that. I mean, I would say probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 97%, not the bank money, but 97% of all money in the economy is digital. So they only print enough money to cover ATM and teller withdrawals. They don't really print money for general use. And so we're in a real different time now. There's a bit of a war on cash going on. But ultimately, banks are intermediaries for the nation state, for the government. And I say nation state because it could be anyone, like Canada. It could be, it's different though in Europe. Europe, I don't know if you all want to take a trip over to Europe with me real quickly.
Sure.
But in Europe, it's very different because Europe is very much like the United States in terms of, like, France is now like Texas, or Greece is like Alabama. And each of these states are currency users. They are not currency issuers anymore. Greece used to have the drachma. You had the French lira, and you had the Italian, oh God, what the hell was it called? Livre, or I can't remember the name of it right now. But bottom line is, each of them had their own currency. They don't have that anymore. The only country, like if you look at the UK, they kept their pound. They kept the pound sterling. Why? Because they understood the power of monetary sovereignty, and they didn't want to give that up. And so, but these countries, if you look, you'll notice that the Southern European states are all hurting, every one of them. And the northern ones, like Germany and so forth, those folks are net exporters, and they are raking it in big time. So they have, I think it's a 3% deficit spending limit that the ECB, or European Central Bank, allows each of these countries to do. And so this is why countries like Greece are basically debtor nations, because they are truly a net importer, and they have no means of creating currency to offset that, unlike Canada and the US. And so it's very important, once again, to get back to that currency issuer, currency user dynamic.
Yeah.
And it will pretty much explain the entire world economy once you get that.
Yeah, although I'm pretty sure I'll get some emails from my listeners in France saying, "You just compared us to Texas? I can't believe you just did that."
I know, right?
Yeah, I think France might be a little bit more left-leaning.
We could have called them Seattle or Washington.
Yeah,
right?
let's do
France,
that.
Washington.
So I'm gonna have to re-listen to this interview several times to really grab everything you're telling me, my friend. I totally appreciate that. But so if the government's essentially creating the money, what creates the value of a thing then? What makes it worth?
The tax. The tax does. Remember, they're saying you can only pay your taxes. Sorry, Bitcoiners, you can only pay your taxes in the state's account. So, how many Bitcoin do I have? I have $500 worth of Bitcoin, right? There's a reason for that. Bitcoin is just an envelope. When you're a currency issuer, the only way you maintain that, unlike the Confederacy in the United States, which couldn't levy a tax and keep it going, right? The United States' ability to tax in its unit of account keeps that value alive and well. And the government can move and set whether they want a hard currency or a weak currency. They have the power to change that by affecting interest rates, or raising or lowering taxes, and so forth. So we are not in any way, shape, or form constrained by markets. We don't care about anyone's faith in the dollar. That's irrelevant. Anytime somebody says that, you automatically know that they are not a serious person. And it really comes down to, what is the penalty for not paying your taxes? Taxes, you're going to get your house taken away. You're going to go to jail, any number of things. I mean, you see what happened to Al Capone. He was brought down by tax evasion. So the government doesn't need your money, though. That's the thing. It doesn't need it, because it deletes it when it receives it, at least the federal government, right? And so what does it need it for? It needs it to hold the value. That's why it does it. It spends first, taxes later. And then, we need the government to fund us, because money comes from the wellspring, which is the government. Interesting, right?
Whoa. Yeah.
Are you okay?
A lot. Wow.
Yeah. It's a lot to absorb.
It is.
It's like, okay.
But I do like it.
So as far as MMT is concerned at this point, how is it being received as far as economists? I mean, we dealt a little bit before that when you said, a lot of them come from the old school thinking, but are some of them actually starting to see the light.
Yes, they are. As a matter of fact, we had a really, really wonderful situation happen here in the U.S. Most people probably wouldn't call it a win because they don't know what they're looking for. But for those of us geeks that follow MMT constantly, John Yarmouth, who is head of the budget committee in the U.S., the ranking Democrat, he came out the other day on C-SPAN and gave a half-hour tour to just crushed it. Explained MMT and referenced Stephanie Kelton's book, called it MMT for a change. Somebody literally in power raised it up and said, this is how it works, man. You've been led wrong. This is how it works. So AOC, she one time lifted up the textbook from Bill Mitchell and Randall Wray called Macroeconomics, which is the MMT textbook. And you've seen Rashida Tlaib issue several bills of late. One of them was minting the $1 trillion coin, which is an old MMT gimmick to do away with the debt limit. The other one was you've got Ayanna Pressley now pushing a federal job guarantee. So the squad is largely lining up to be advised by many MMT economists. And you see it in Australia where they're coming around it too. You see it in the UK where it's happening. You see it all over the world. Japan has a debt to GDP ratio of 300%. 300%. And so, you are seeing this happen in different places. It is hard fought. You guys like Richard Wolff who get the workplace dynamic right, but they can't macroeconomically wiggle their way out of a paper bag. You've got a lot of these pundits that are alternative media and in mainstream media even that get it terribly wrong. Either the mainstream gets it terribly wrong, asking the same ridiculous asked and answer question of how you're going to pay for it, or worse, you've got the alt media running around talking about blood libel and the Rothschilds. It's ridiculous. But this is what we're left with. No,
the Rothschild.
Think about this. I used to joke around. If you know the band Slayer, I used to do, instead of Angel of Death, I would do the Rothschilds, and I would mess around with people with that. But I used to say, hey, look, if you know it's the Rothschilds that are doing these things, why don't we bribe the butler? Get him to poison their Earl Grey or put a bar of soap in the friggin' stall. Game over. We win, suckers. Checkmate,
Perfect.
It's so much saucier, so much
you can't poison the Rothschild or lizard people. You can't. They're immune to that.
They just eat gold.
Yeah, you won't poison them. It will make them stronger.
It'll only make them multiply.
Oh gosh.
But the QAnon files.
No.
but think about this, right? You're asking why it's so screwed up, right? Look at the idiocy that's surrounded with COVID right now. You've got people coming out of the woodworks with. Do you ever see the movie My Big Fat Greek Wedding?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Do you remember the father coming around Windex, squirting everybody with Windex because it solves everything? Here, gargle with some Windex. Here, I'll squirt your arm with some Windex. You got a wart. Here's some Windex, right? It's the same thing with COVID, and it's the same thing with economics. They do the exact same thing because whenever there are questions, there is a cottage industry out there waiting to exploit your lack of knowledge to create some death ray from Saturn, some crazy lunatic fringe idea that's not even a good conspiracy theory. It's not even a good one. And it sells because that's what happens when the government hides itself, doesn't speak plainly. Yeah. And so MMT oftentimes looks like, are you kidding me? Is this yet another conspiracy theory? No, it's accounting. It's just accounting. I promise you, it's just accounting.
No, I can explain it to you, so it's real.
I can literally walk you through step by step.
People don't understand how simple numbers are, and they don't lie. And especially in accounting, if it doesn't balance, you've made a mistake.
You guys will have to excuse me. I have to call my stockbroker. I got to sell all my shares of ivermectin now.
Oh, yes, right.
Hey, at least you'll be regular and you'll have no worms, right?
Yep, exactly. And they're
30%
calling
of the
us
US
sheep. That's all I got to
30%
say.
of the US would be worm dead.
Hey, if you've ever been to India, okay, and even if you haven't, if you go on Google or YouTube, you can see, they've got some problems with their water in India. Okay, there's a lot of parasites in their water.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of, like, you can see canals full of trash. It's a pretty filthy place in a lot of ways, and it's unsanitary in some ways. And so from what the real story is, in India, people do take ivermectin quite a bit because they are deworming themselves literally. They are literally getting the waterborne parasites that they took in, and they're getting rid of it. And so, yes, in India, they do that. And there's a valid reson for doing that. But
that's probably where that whole conspiracy came from, actually.
It could be.
That's where
it might very well be.
There is human grade ivermectin. However, the side effects are horrendous, and they don't give it lightly. They only give it in cases where you need to be dewormed.
That's right.
And COVID is not a worm.
No, exactly.
No, it's a protein, for crying out loud. I mean, a protein and a lipid at that, right? I mean, it really kind of is. It in and of itself is like just a real nice little box of truth, if you will. It shows you how MMT gets screwed up. It shows you how our medical system gets screwed up. All it takes is just a drop of truth in a story. One little drop of truth, like a drop of ink in a thing of water, and you don't have clear water anymore. That's it. You just destroyed any sense of clarity. And there's a meme. It's a great meme. It's got the squiggle line all over the place, and then it's got this one straight line in the other picture. And it's like, here's how we pay for everything with MMT. Here's how everyone else does it, right? Yeah. And it's true. This is the point. And like I said, I'm so happy to have an accountant on here because you get the jokes. You understand. You literally understand how ridiculous it is. And I think maybe what is more troubling about this than ever is that as a guy like me tries to explain some of these very, very basic principles of macroeconomics that are so vital for us to rally. Can you think of a more central thing that people should be able to unite behind and fight back for? It touched the Green New Deal. It touches Medicare. It touches all these programs that we need to save ourselves from extinction. I mean, from $2 trillion in student debt in the United States, you name it, all these massive things. You can't tax your way to that. If you wanted to give reparations, and let's take Sandy Darity from Duke University's book From Here to Equality, where he puts out basically $15 trillion for the African descendants of slaves, American descendants of slaves, excuse me. And these folks are literally going, how are we going to pay for it? Well, we'll tax this person. You can't come up with 15 trillion.
No
taxing plus all the other programs. It's preposterous. Just think about it on its face. That's stupid, right? And so I think that if you can get down to brass tacks and say, what is it that you want? What is it you want? If we can think it, if we can dream it, if we can resource it, we can afford it. That's the deal. That's it. If you've got the votes for it, we can afford it. So what do? They purposely play on your ignorance to prevent you from uniting and rallying around the thing that would help you afford it. Literally, this is literally the game. The more control they have of us by keeping us at shitty wages, the more control they have by putting our health care in the employer's hands so that we're stuck and trapped, right? The more control, the more discipline they can put on labor. And this is a standard Marxist thing. You realize that capital is going to grind labor to a nub. It's going to extract as much value out of labor as it can and pocket it. And so MMT, for those Marxists out there who think that we're going to live in a post-money society, good luck with that. This is one of those very, very critical things to understand, that without understanding this, you're never going to get that surplus value back. You're never going to make it so that labor wins. And I think this is a really vital thing, and it's all obscured by that one drop of ink in the water.
Yeah.
So let's do a magic wand moment for a second there. something happens, and all of a sudden, MMT is the way to go. How would the world change, in your opinion? How would tomorrow be different?
Well, so let me give you the real mind bender. MMT doesn't require us to believe in it. It's here. It is what it is. Right? It is. This is it. Right? It's not something we implement. It is it. What you're saying is, what if everybody suddenly woke up tomorrow and realized that was that? Right?
Yeah. If they stop doing the squiggle and you just go with the straight line.
Yeah.
With that in mind, let me tell you what would happen. The people that are pushing for good things to happen for regular people would have a clear path to making that happen. But it would expose the motives of the bad people, so to speak, because now you don't have an affordability thing to say, well, we can't afford it. How can we afford that? Now you're just an asshole. Now I know you don't want me to have health care because you just want to control me. Now I know that you don't want us to survive. You are greedy. It exposes the heart immediately once you get rid of the myths and legends. See, the myths and legends give you air cover for really, really horrendous beliefs. It gives air cover for horrendous people to do horrendous things to the most vulnerable in society. I mean, we could eradicate poverty yesterday. Literally eradicate it completely. We could literally take away student debt yesterday without even a thought. We could have retrofitted every smokestack in the world without even thinking about it. We could have easily put wind farms, solar farms everywhere, on top of every garage, on top of made every solar roadway. We could have done all this instantly. We could have built sustainable cities. We could still do that, right? All these things, I think, would become reality once the people really realized, instead of looking, well, when will Bernie Sanders tell me it's okay to do that? When will AOC tell me it's okay to do that? That appeal to authority is so great that they're waiting. It's like, oh, when are they going to say it's okay to say this? Well, I'm here to tell you it's okay to say it now and make demands now and organize around this truth now to make real substantive change now. We don't have time. And this is one of the beautiful things is that MMT makes money the least important thing to ever talk about. That's the beauty of MMT. It literally takes money and puts it in the corner and says, you're not important. What do we want? That's important. What do we need? That's important. What can we resource? That's important. How do we survive? That's important. And I think that's the most incredibly important insight that I gained from MMT was money is the least important thing.
I used to say money is the poorest of all riches.
Well, that's probably some truth to that. You know, think about it. I used to get annoyed with libertarians when they would say stuff like, well, cash isn't real wealth. No, it's not real wealth, but it sure can pay for an awful lot of health care, right?
Yep.
And so there's this flip side, right? It's like the UBI community, for example, pushing this, and they don't realize that cash is not the important thing here. Poor people want to eat. Poor people want a roof over their head. Poor people want clothing. Poor people want safety and security. Okay. Healthcare. Giving them cash and saying, now you go out there and make some really wise buying decisions, Mr. Poor Person living under a bridge. I'm sure you've got great connections to really make things happen there, buddy. You know, no, you want to provide him with dental care, period. I don't care what the price of that dental care is. The government could absorb that. That guy cannot absorb it. He's a currency user. The currency issuer can. Currency user cannot. Exactly. So, I mean, this starts becoming really apparent after a while. And then all of a sudden, when the light really goes on, you become a fire-breathing MMT evangelist. You have no choice. You can't turn it off once you realize people are dying for no reason. That's what drives you. It makes you wake up in the morning, makes you stay up all night, going crazy, wanting to save the world. And to me, that's what MMT is. It represents the real, honest to God pathway out of this neoliberal freaking hell we're in. And you know, that's it in a nutshell.
Yeah.
And that's a great way to end this.
It is. Well, and honestly, my hope is that one day the U.S. government wakes up and realizes that humanism is actually kind of a nice thing to do, and it really doesn't cost all that much.
Steve, thank you so much for being on the show. Really appreciate all your input on all this today. If people want to find out more about you and MMT, where can they go?
Please come to our website, realprogressives.org. You can find all the podcasts I do under our media dropdown. We also have a great section called Modern Monetary Theory Basics. We also have a bookshelf and other things. And please go to our website, our YouTube channel of Real Progress in Action, where you'll see a lot of the videos that I do. We also have a bunch of other folks like Caleb Mood, who does MMT Mondays. And we have Luke Parcher, who normally would go live on Sundays as well from 2 to 4. So we're all over the place. And tonight may not be the night you release this, but Sunday nights at 8 p.m., we release our next episode of the new Untouchables. And really, really fantastic. Lots of whistleblowers, big time people that have done big time things. People like Bill Black and Dennis Kucinich, whole host of people. Very, very good. Very, very informative show.
Fantastic.
I see. I have a new podcast.
Yeah, I'm taking notes here.
I'm glad because I'm out of podcast. True crime only goes so far.
Steve, before I let you go, I gotta have you say, "Hi, I'm Steve Grumbine of MMT," or whichever podcast you want to name there that you do. And I took a left at the valley.
Hi, I'm Steve Grumbine. I'm the host of Macro and Cheese and the new Untouchables, and I took a left at the valley.
Fantastic.
Thank
Bravo.
you.
And that was Steve Grumbine with Modern Monetary Theory. Whoa. Is your mind blown already? Mine sure is.
Do you have smoke coming out your ears?
Oh, God.
Like
the
the earbuds is keeping the smoke in. So
Thank goodness, right?
That was a lot to absorb.
I love it.
I'll be the first one to admit I'm completely ignorant when it comes to matters of economics. I hope we did a favor for our audience out there, and I still learn a few things.
I was very interested, but I know that we may have bored some people, but I hope not because he's very interesting to hear.
I think he's piqued my interest, so I'm certainly going to go look at the realprogressive.org and MMT Basics and all that, and macroeconomics. And,
macro and cheese. It was called the podcast.
Yeah,
I'm totally going
and
to
his
download
YouTube channel, Real Progress in Action. Look that up. Steve's a fantastic guy, so I really enjoyed him as a guest. I hope to have him again as a
definitely.
guest. So that should be pretty fun. Any other thoughts on Steve and macroeconomics? Macroeconomics.
Macroeconomics.
MMT, modern monetary. Any more thoughts about that, guys?
No, my head just hurts. It's just
Is it? Well,
getting there. I'll have to re-listen to it, I think.
Yeah.
It's going to be one of those shows you're going to be listening over and over again.
It's probably not going to air tonight because we have to host guests.
Yeah, that's fine.
How dare you.
So thank you so much to Steve Grumbine for being our guest, and thank you to my co-hosts Sabrina, Brentley, and Benjamin for being there. Thank you for listening. You can follow us at leftandvalley.ca. You can find us on Facebook, on Twitter at LATV Podcast. You can help or become a patron. You go to patreon.com/LATV and you get an unedited, unscripted, unrehearsed version of the show, behind-the-scene looks, and all that stuff.
You can watch us live too. I send out a link before we go live, so if you want to watch and comment,
that's for patrons.
Patrons only.
You can send us an
you can be in between conversation. Kevin tells terrible dad jokes.
Yes, stuff you just don't get to see. That's when, restart.
Restart, take two, etc. Brent, you want to give a quick plug for Unapologetics there, bud?
Sure. Yeah, Unapologetics panel stream on YouTube. Please like and subscribe, and check us out. It's all live, and you can you don't have to be a patron to comment on that one. So
no, we let you
for
free.
Not yet. No. Yeah.
Unapologetics with an X.
Exactly. With an X, yeah.
Change the spelling.
Coming up next week, we'll have Dr. Todd Frank Miller talk about critical thinking. We'll have also Mary B. Lepage talk about religious trauma. We'll have our old friend David Fitzgerald will be coming back with his better half. Talk about his new books about time shards. We'll have Candace Gorman talk about death and disbelief. And that's what we got coming up so far.
Wow.
Awesome.
I'm excited for next week.
Got a good lineup.
Critical thinking, it's something lacking in a lot of our USians down there.
Well, remember, he sent us the book so you can read his book, right?
Oh, really? There's a book?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
You got to catch up on the book.
Yikes! Because I'm reading this week.
Oh, boy. Thank you so much, guys. Until next time.
Oh, yeah.
The reason is apparent. You do what you're told and believe in the God assigned by your parents. I'm proud to be an atheist, a skeptic, a non-believer, an infidel, a heathen. I call it how I see it.
Actually, the funny thing is I kind of look at you. You look a lot like my old man, like my father. It's just,
Yeah,
Oh,
kind
wow.
of.
my dad was a looker too. Right?
Yeah.
You never know. You never know about your parents. And the funny thing is, when Dad died, you never know that your parents are players till they die.
And all the women come to the funeral.
It's true. My father was absolutely true. My father had like piercing blue eyes, and he had the look, the beard, and the hair just like yours. And no lies, my mother, one of his ex-wife, a girlfriend, and some other random woman came to me and basically told me in confidence, before he passed away, your father told me I was the love of his life. Every single one of them. All four of them. And I'm looking at this and I'm saying, okay. And, my mother said that. And then, his ex-wife at some point said that. And then the girlfriend said that. And I'm not contradicting them because I'm like, oh, really? My mother said the same thing.
Yeah. Kevin, I'm your mother. I'm your mother, Kevin.
Exactly. And then after that, you get the obituary in the paper.
Yes.
As the obituary was published, some random woman sent a letter to the editor lamenting his death, like a wailing widow, and we have no idea who this woman is. So I got that my old man apparently was a player. Apparently, I had no idea. Prim and proper dad, no idea, but apparently he was a player.
All right.